watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fills all things, treasury of good things, and giver of life, come and dwell within us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. On a Saturday night, we're talking death penalty and whether or not Pope Francis changed the church's teaching on the matter. This has been something that has come up pretty often on in the live chat. So a lot of people have asked about this, and I have promised to do a show on it. I can't promise that this will be the only one that I do on it. Excuse me. I imagine that might end up doing some more additional ones on it in the future, but for now, this will kind of prime the pump and get us going. What I'll do is go through the change itself to the Catechism that Pope Francis promulgated, and also the accompanying letter that he sent to the bishops that discusses this. And I'm going to talk about it and whether or not it's a change the church teaching and to what extent is it binding. So all kinds of stuff to that end. Wow, where do we start though? No, there's so much really to touch on here when it comes to the issue of the death penalty. And I have to say that just making some initial observations here, there is an aspect to this revision that is disciplinary. I've noted that before, and I still continue to defend that. There's also an aspect to the revision that is doctrinal, but the revision itself is not doctrinal. The revision, however, is based on a development of doctrine. So he did not revise any doctrinal, he did not promulgate any doctrinal changes, but the disciplinary change that he offers is partly based on matters of fact, which are disputable, and then a matter of a development of doctrine. That's where this thing gets sticky. So I'll again tell you my conclusion, before we dive in, so that you know up front what position I take. I think that the revision to the death penalty is a prudential disciplinary decision based on two things. Based on, number one, a development of doctrine, and number two, based on a claim that relates to a matter of fact, which could be disputed. And this matter of fact is on the current penal system. And one may push back and say, well, I disagree with the way that the penal system is conceived today, or I disagree and say that the way that the Pope describes the penal system today doesn't apply to every country, so it's not inadmissible in every country, or should not be considered inadmissible in every country. So that's kind of where we're going, and I'm going to develop that as we go through these two documents. But I do want to be kind of upfront. I don't believe that he has changed church teaching. I believe the church teaching on the death penalty has remained the same. He does not teach that it's intrinsically evil. But the question is, should it be used today? And when we ask the question, should it be used today, that is more of a disciplinary question, not necessarily a doctrinal question. Though he does base his answer on should we use it today in his disciplinary decision, he does base it partly on some issues that are not doctrinally related and some issues that are doctrinally related. So I want to take a look at those. Let's examine, and let me pull it up on my screen. Okay, hold on. Please let me know if y'all have any difficulty seeing it when I do pull it up. And I'm just looking through the chat, by the way. Sean Matthews says that's confusing. I understand that sounds confusing. It's going to be less confusing when we go through the document, because I'm going to elaborate on this further. It will be then more apparent what I'm saying. I just kind of wanted to be upfront, though, with where I'm coming from, so that you know immediately right up front what my position is. I don't know what this is, but rule number 1, don't disagree with Michael. You can definitely disagree with me. I don't mind people disagreeing with me. I definitely mind whenever somebody does so in a way that is uncharitable. That's problematic. But you can disagree, and I'd like to hear disagreements. If you take a different position on this than I do, that's fine. I'd like to hear about it. But wait until the end, until I've had the chance to walk through the text and outline my position, and maybe then tell me why you would still disagree. Let's see. Let me pull it up here. Oh, this is funny, by the way. Can we see in the future a clean-shaven Michael? I have not seen myself clean-shaven in probably 2004. Should be what, 18 years ago? I haven't seen myself clean shaven since then. And that was only because I was required to shave by my employer. So, yeah, other than that, I probably wouldn't have been ever since I was able to grow a beard. So yeah, probably 2004 since I've been clean shaven. So I'm not sure what I would look like. Although I do remember one time when I was trimming my own beard, and I trimmed it so poorly that I had to trim it like really, 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 really short, so that I wasn't entirely clean shaven, but it was really short. So it kind of gave me an idea of what I would look like. So. But if you can't tell, I'm going to be growing out the beard. So no, there won't be any clean shavenness going on here. As you can see, it's kind of getting longer there. So, all right. Did Michael play for the Yankees? No, I did not. I'm not even sure why one would think that I did. Okay, let's pull it up on the screen. Okay, here we go. Okay. All right. I can see it now. All right. I can see it, but I won't be able to read your comments at the moment. So hold off on any questions that you might have for me or comments that you might have for me until towards the end. Okay. So let's read through the revision to the Catechism on the death penalty first. And then let's read through the accompanying letter, because the letter that was sent to the bishops helps understand the text much better than the text itself, right? Just the text is kind of the skeleton, and the accompanying letter gives the meat and flesh and skin to the skeleton. So, all right, let's go ahead and read it. Supreme Pontiff and the audience granted 2018 to the undersigned prefect has approved the following draft, arranging for it to be translation into various languages, inserted into the edition of the aforementioned catechism. So the approval is magisterial. It is based on a magisterial address by Pope Francis. So it was an address to the participants in the meeting organized by the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of New Evangelization, which is really low level magisterium, papal magisterium, but it is papal magisterium. And again, this also would make it magisterial even if this weren't although it is. And just sneak peek, the accompanying letter is magisterial as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay. So here's what it says. The death penalty. Recourse to the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. Today, however, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes. Stop. This is a development of doctrine. This is not a disciplinary change. This part, that sentence right there, and I'll further substantiate that later. But this is talking about the dignity of the person. That is a doctrinal matter. That is not a matter of discipline. So what it's speaking about here when it refers to an increasing awareness is a development of doctrine, which, again, the next document will explicitly identify. But I do want to bring that out because that's often overlooked in these discussions. We don't want to say this is merely a disciplinary change. It is a disciplinary change, but it's a disciplinary change based on two things. Number one, a development of doctrine, and number two, a claim about our penal system, which is a matter of fact, and matters of fact can be disputed, or a claim that something is a matter of fact, right? I'm not actually saying that it's right and it's a matter of fact as in it's really true, but matters of fact meaning a claim that is made about something that is not faith and morals related per se. That's what I mean here by matter of fact. So matter of fact would be something like Jesus walked to Galilee, although that would end up impacting matters of faith if you denied it, but it is just strictly speaking considered in a vacuum a matter of fact. Or 2 + 2 = 4, that's a matter of fact. Or some kind of scientific equation, or some chemistry claim, that would be a matter of fact, right? And those are open to dispute. In addition, a new understanding has emerged. Notice this, there's a new understanding that has emerged in light of this development here on the dignity of the person. A new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. So a new understanding on penal systems has emerged due to a new understanding on the dignity of the human person. So there have been some changes in the penal system because of an awareness of the dignity of the person. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed. That's a claim related to a matter of fact. You might dispute that and say, well, has that actually been the case in all countries? Which ensure the due protection of citizens, but at the same time do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. So in light of the dignity of the human person, we now have developed penal systems that will protect citizens, that will keep them safe from a murderer, while at the same time affording the murderer the opportunity to be redeemed and to repent for their crime. So that's what it's saying so far. So we're seeing a difference here in the penal system related to a matter of a development of doctrine. Okay, but here's the part. Consequently, so because of all this, the church teaches. So we are dealing with a teaching here, but it gets a little sticky because it's a disciplinary decision based on a teaching. So try to let's see if we can make sense of this. The church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible. Notice it says inadmissible, doesn't say immoral. I've heard guys who have a great deal of influence irresponsibly say that the Pope says that the death penalty is now immoral or intrinsically evil. It's not what is said. The church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible. That relates to a matter of discipline, but it is on and based on a matter of teaching, partly. Inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, also based on doctrine, right? So we have a disciplinary decision based on teachings and a development of doctrine. And she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. This isn't the only reason for it, though. This isn't the only reason for the disciplinary change. As we're going to see, there are other reasons for it. But from what we can gather, it's partly because of a development of doctrine. It's also partly because of the penal system and developments to it that is able to guarantee the protection of citizens, but not deprive the criminal of the possibility of redemption. That's a matter of fact. That's a claim that is matter of fact related, and you might dispute whether that's factually true. You might dispute that and say, well, I don't agree that our system actually does that. Or you might say that, well, that might be the case in some countries, but not all penal systems do that. So what about the countries that don't have that structure in their penal system? Is it admissible for them? Those are fair questions because that's based on, matters of fact, but it's not entirely just based on matters of fact. So the disciplinary change is not just because of factual claims that can be disputed. The disciplinary change is also due to developments in doctrine. Now, how we apply that doctrine, yes, I understand that could be disputed depending on things like, well, how is our penal system structured? But I do want to still note that it's not entirely a disciplinary change based merely on claims to factual claims. It's also partly based on doctrine. So we have to grapple with that. All right. Let's look further and expand on that a little bit further with the accompanying letter. Let's read through the whole thing since it's not very long. All right, so this is the letter to the bishops regarding the new revision of number 2267 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church on the death penalty from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. So this is a CDF document. And by the way, let's just go ahead and spoiler alert. Sovereign Pontiff in the audience granted to the undersigned Secretary of the Congregation has approved the present letter, adopted in the ordinary session, and ordered its publication. It doesn't mention if this is an approval in general form, common form, or specific form. It doesn't mention that. The latter would be he's looked at every instance in it, every line by it, improved every line. The more common general is somebody probably just read it to him and he's like, yeah, that sounds good. And so it's authoritative on the whole, but maybe not necessarily every little jot and tittle in it. He doesn't specify which one that is, but given how short this is and how much Pope Francis talks about this, it's probably something that he has approved, like line by line in specific form. At the very least, it's authoritative, right? It is magisterial. So you can't just say, well, I don't have to follow this because the Catechism of the Catholic Church in and of itself doesn't have any magisterial weight. Though that's true, the teachings that are in the Catechism, however, they are authoritative insofar as the sources on which they rely are authoritative. And we've already seen 3 magisterial documents that this is based on. Number 1, the papal address. Number 2, the actual revision to the Catechism. And number 3, the letter accompanying it. So we already have 3 magisterial, non-definitive, but magisterial documents promulgating and approving of this disciplinary change and the development of doctrine that the disciplinary change is based on. So let's let's read through it, but let me maybe give quickly a rundown on assent that is owed to disciplinary changes. So of course, magisterial teachings, if we're talking about non-definitive magisterial teachings, the assent owed is religious submission of intellect and will, where you submit your intellect, you willfully submit your intellect to what is being proposed. That is owed to non-definitive teachings, and so that would be owed to the claim that the dignity of the human person, we've become more aware of the dignity of the human person, and that has certain implications. We need to submit to that with submission of intellect and will, because there's nothing in the prior magisterium that would outweigh that and contradict that with a higher weight. So that's going to be something we would assent to. As far as the disciplinary change, well, the thing there, and I've noted this on other shows. In fact, I was on Christian B. Wagner's show, Militant Thomist, on his show just earlier, and I mentioned this, but I've also noted it with others as well. And that is, when we speak about disciplinary changes, the assent owed is obedience. But I don't think most of us are in the position to impose or withdraw the death penalty on a person. So it's kind of hard to speak of obedience to this for us. Maybe if you're a governor of a state, you might need to consider whether or not you're going to be obedient to this. But again, it's kind of hard for us to speak about obedience since we're not in a position to impose or withdraw the death penalty on somebody. We're not lawmakers, right? Most of us, I'd imagine. So kind of hard to speak of assent there. But I do want to say that even so, we should still be very respectful of what has been promulgated by the Holy See and not cause scandal. And if we have a disagreement with it, it needs to be on the disciplinary aspect, not on the development of doctrine aspect. And you might have some disagreements, for example, about the claim that the penal system is at a point where we can use other measures to protect society. You might disagree with that, or you might say that that's not the case for all countries. So in those cases, the death penalty might still be admissible. I could see one offering that kind of pushback. Not saying they would necessarily be right, but I could see somebody doing that, and may or may not be right. Okay, so now that we've just talked about the levels of assent that are owed, or at least when it comes to non-definitive teachings and then disciplinary prudential decisions, I think we can move forward and actually read the document. So, Holy Father Pope Francis in his Discord, John Paul II promulgated the Catechism, asked that the teaching of the death penalty be reformulated so as to better reflect the development of doctrine on this point that has taken place. And his perspective was very similar to Pope Francis's perspective. He notes that, again, not even a murderer loses his personal dignity. In the same light as one should understand the attitude towards the death penalty that is expressed even more widely in the teaching of pastors and the sensibility of the people of God. In fact, in the political and social situation of the past, made the death penalty an acceptable means for protection of the good. All right, so listen. You'll note, if in fact the political situation of the past made the death penalty an acceptable means, today the increasing understanding of the dignity of the human person is not lost even after committing the most serious crimes. It's admitting that at one point the penal system would have allowed for the death penalty, which means it recognizes the death penalty is not intrinsically evil. So if you're going out there saying Pope Francis teaches it's intrinsically evil, stop that. Stop that. You're spreading lies. You're scandalizing souls. Stop doing it. Now, it does also note that today The increasing understanding of the dignity of the person is not lost on them. The deepened understanding of the significance of penal sanctions applied by the state and the development of a more efficacious detention system that guarantees the due protection of citizens have given rise to a new awareness that recognizes the inadmissibility of the death penalty and therefore calling for its abolition. So a lot going on here. But what it's saying is this. Before, perhaps the death penalty could have been imposed in a society that did not have the penal system that we do today. But because we also, number one, have an increasing awareness of the dignity of the human person, and we've had developments in our penal sanctions such that we can now guarantee the protection of society without resorting to the death penalty, the death penalty for today is no longer admissible. It's talking about today in our context, in our society, in light of the penal system. And you might say, again, but I don't agree that that's the situation today with our penal system. You might offer that pushback, and that might then impact whether or not it's admissible, right? But they're not saying it's inadmissible because it's always wrong and intrinsically evil. That's not what it says. It notes, in fact, in the past, this may have been legitimate, but it was an extreme form to protect society. All right. In this development, and what development are we referring to? We're talking about the development to the penal system, and we're also talking about the development in our understanding of the dignity of the human person. This development of the dignity of the human person does not make the death penalty intrinsically evil. It never says that. But this development of doctrine about the dignity of the human person does impact how we should treat them with the penal system that we currently have. And it might even impact what penal system should we develop as a society. But it is nowhere saying this development of doctrine of the dignity of the human person makes the death penalty intrinsically evil. It's not saying that. It says it's inadmissible in light of the dignity and in light of our penal system. Okay. In this development, the teaching of the encyclical Evangelium Vitae of John Paul II is of great importance. The Holy Father enumerated the signs of hope for a new culture of life, a growing public opposition to the death penalty, even when such a penalty is seen as a kind of legitimate defense on the part of society. Modern society, in fact, has the means of effectively suppressing crime by rendering criminals harmless without definitively denying them the chance to reform. You might disagree with that and say, no, that's factually incorrect because of blah, 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 blah. You can do that. You can do that. Now, come prepared, right? You need to back it up. But you could do that and say, no, that's not necessarily the case in all contexts. But notice the emphasis here. And that is on, there are other ways that we can deal with these criminals to protect society. Modern society has developed those. The teaching of Evangelium Vitae was then included in the Editio Typica of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. In it, the death penalty is not presented as a proportionate penalty for the gravity of the crime, which is true, but it can be justified if it is the only predictable way to defend the lives of human beings effectively against the aggressor. Now listen. It's recognizing that the Catechism said this. And it's going to note later on that it's the current Catechism and the current policy is not actually contradicting this. So this is still true. It is still the case that in some cases, the death penalty could be the way and the only way to defend the citizens of a particular community. But it wants to say, but this is so rare, if even applicable anymore. So it goes on to say, even if in reality, cases of absolute necessity of suppression of the offender today are very rare, if not practically non-existent. It recognizes the truthfulness of this. And if it recognizes the truthfulness of this, that means it's not saying the death penalty is intrinsically evil. because you couldn't say this if you believed it's intrinsically evil. And again, later on, it's going to say that the right here, paragraph 8, all this shows that the new formulation of the number 2267 of the Catechism expresses an authentic development of doctrine that is not in contradiction with prior teachings of the magisterium. It's not in contradiction to this. It's not in contradiction to it. So in other words, this is true, but what they're trying to say is, but it's no longer applicable today, is what they're getting at. But it's true that in a system where you don't have other ways to deal with murderers, you might have to resort to the death penalty. It acknowledges that, which means it doesn't say that it's intrinsically evil. This is important because there's a lot of people out there slandering the church, slandering the Holy Father, and it needs to stop. We need to stop, number one, misquoting this. I always hear somebody quoting and saying, well, Pope Francis teaches that the death penalty is immoral. That's not what I said. Not what he says. At best, you could say it's immoral today in light of our penal systems. But that's not to just say it's immoral, period, point blank, no qualifications. Because that now gives the impression to say that, well, what God allowed for in the Old Testament and New Testament is immoral. And so clearly he's wrong, right? And what the church has done for, several thousand years now is immoral. So clearly he's wrong, right? It's just incredibly misleading at best. All right. John Paul II also intervened on the occasions against the death penalty, appealing both to respect for the dignity of the person as well as means that today's society possesses to defend itself from the criminals. Once again, notice the two themes here. Number one, a development of doctrine on the dignity of the person, and then a development in our penal system. Thus, in the Christmas message of 98, he wished that the consensus concerning the need for urgent and adequate measures to end the death penalty. The following month in the United States, he repeated, a sign of hope is the increasing recognition that the dignity of the human life must never be taken away, even in the case of someone who has done great evil. Modern society has the means of protecting itself. Notice again, same two themes, without definitively denying criminals the chance to reform. I renew the appeal I made most recently at Christmas for a consensus to end the death penalty, which is both cruel and unnecessary. Notice, again, the two themes there, cruel and unnecessary. One pertains to development of doctrine and the dignity of the soul. Unnecessary pertains to disciplinary developments based on our penal system. So, okay. The motivation to be committed to the abolition of the death penalty was continued with the subsequent pontiffs. Benedict XVI recalled the attention of society's leaders to the need to make every effort to eliminate the death penalty. So this isn't just Pope Francis. This is John Paul II. This is also B16. All right, for all you Benny Plenists out there. Which I don't imagine there's a lot of them, but there you go. He later wished a group of faithful that your deliberations will encourage the political and legislative initiatives being promoted in a growing number of countries, eliminate the death penalty, and continue the substantive progress made in conforming penal law both to the human dignity of prisoners and the effective maintenance of public order. Oh, more of the same, blah, 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 blah. In the same prospective, Pope Francis has reaffirmed that today capital punishment is unacceptable, however serious condemned crime may have been. The death penalty, regardless of the means of execution, entails cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And that's, of course, going to be a claim based on the development on our awareness of the dignity of the human person. Now, some might say, yeah, considered in a vacuum, it is cruel, inhumane, and degrading. But if that is all that a society can do to protect itself, could they still use the death penalty, even if it is technically cruel, inhumane, and degrading? And the answer would be yes. But Pope Francis is going to want to say, but that's not the case with today's society. There's other ways of handling it. So it would be wrong to do this. Furthermore, it is to be rejected due to the defective selectivity of the criminal justice system and in the face of the possibility of judicial error. So part of this is also based on the idea that, well, there could be an error in judgment, but also part of it is based on the justice system and the development to it. It is in this light that Pope Francis has asked for a revision of the formulation of the Catechism of the Catholic Church on the death penalty in a manner that affirms that no matter how serious the crime has been committed, the death penalty is inadmissible. Okay, that again pertains, that's a disciplinary decision, because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. You might say, well, but it's saying you can't do it because it's against the dignity of the human person. Yes, but he's saying you can't do it because it's against the dignity of the human person, and it is not the means that you should take against them and act against their dignity in a society that has other ways to protect its citizens. That's the context. In other words, in a society that has other ways to protect its citizens, it's inadmissible because it's going against their dignity. There's other ways to handle this. But that's not the same thing as, well, you can never use the death penalty even in a context where a society doesn't have any other way to defend its citizens other than the death penalty. He didn't say that. He's saying it's inadmissible because it's against their dignity in a society that has other means to protect its citizens. The new revision of number 2267 of the Catechism, approved by Pope Francis, situates itself in continuity with the preceding magisterium. Notice that. It is in continuity with the previous magisterium. They could not say that if they maintained that the death penalty is always inadmissible at all places and at all times. They couldn't say that if they believed it's intrinsically evil and always immoral. They couldn't say that. They could not say that they're in continuity with the magisterium. And yet they say they're in continuity, which should tell you they're not saying that it's always inadmissible. It's always an unjustified violation of human dignity. It's always immoral. It's not what they're saying. And in fact, they implied that it was acceptable at one point. So it situates itself in continuity with the previous magisterium while bringing forth a coherent development of doctrine. And what is the development of doctrine on? On the use of the death penalty itself? No. The development of doctrine is on the dignity of the human person, which has implications on the death penalty. But it's not a development of doctrine on the death penalty itself. It's a development of doctrine on the recognition of human dignity, which then has some implications elsewhere. The new text, following the footsteps of the teaching of John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae, affirms that ending the life of a criminal as punishment for a crime is inadmissible. Notice the word again, because it attacks the dignity of the human person. Now listen, a dignity that is not even lost after having committed the most serious crimes. Right. It attacks their dignity, and it's inadmissible today in the context of a society that has other ways to protect its citizens. In a context where there's no other way, the church recognizes the idea that, you could use the death penalty. This conclusion is reached taking into account the new understanding of penal sanctions applied by the modern state. Did you hear that? This new understanding about how today we shouldn't use it is based on new understanding of penal sanctions applied by the modern state, which should be oriented above all to the rehabilitation and social integration of the criminal. And you might push back on this idea. You might push back. Well, is that really what it should be? Right? Is that really what the criminal system should be about? You might push back on it. Finally, given that modern society possesses more efficient detention systems, the death penalty becomes unnecessary as a protection for the life of innocent people. So it wants to say it's inadmissible today because it's against their dignity, and that would be tolerated if that was the only way to protect society, but it's unnecessary to protect. It's unnecessary because there's other means to protect society. Therefore, it's inadmissible today. But you might say, but what about countries that don't have this kind of penal system? Is it inadmissible there? You might push back on that and say, well, I think that, some countries, they don't have that ability. And they might say, okay, but those countries need to develop that kind of penal system. Maybe, but what do we do in the meantime until they develop it? I think the church would say, well, it could be used, but I mean, we really need to develop the penal system so that we don't have to use it, because it is a violation of their human dignity. So that's effectively what it's getting at. All right. Certainly, it reminds the duty of public authorities to defend the life of citizens, as has been taught by the magisterium and is confirmed by the Catechism, blah, 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 blah. Again, all this shows that the new formulation expresses an authentic development of doctrine that is not in contradiction with the prior teachings of the magisterium. I mean, that's the money quote. The development that takes place here is on the human dignity of the person, the dignity of the human person. And that is not in contradiction to the magisterium, and prior teachings on the magisterium. That's most certain. And the idea that it's inadmissible today due to a different penal systems and a different penal context is also not a contradiction to prior teachings, because prior teachings were based on a society that did not have other ways to protect its citizens. At least they thought they didn't. So it was allowed at that time. So that's how they can harmonize it with the past. It's not saying it's intrinsically evil, but they couldn't say this if they were saying that the death penalty is intrinsically evil. These teachings, in fact, can be explained in the light of the primary responsibility of the public authority to protect the common good, in which penal sanctions were understood differently and had developed in an environment in which it was more difficult to guarantee the criminal could not repeat his crime. There you go. These teachings that allowed for the death penalty were in the context where you had different situations with the penal system, and it was more difficult to protect society from the criminals. So again, it recognizes the legitimate use of the death penalty and the teachings that were about that in that context. But it just wants to say, well, today we're not in that context. And that may or may not be true. That's what's up for debate. The part about the dignity of the human conscience, the human person, is not up for debate. The part on whether or not this is true about our penal system today is what is up for debate. The new revision affirms that the understanding of the inadmissibility of the death penalty grew in light of the gospel. And so the gospel itself does have certain implications on our understanding of the human person, which itself has certain implications on the use of the death penalty. And that's what it's referring to here. The gospel, in fact, helps to understand better the order of creation that the Son of God is so purified and brought to fulfillment. It also invites us to the mercy and patience of the Lord that gives to each person the time to convert to oneself. The new formulation in the Catechism desires to give energy to a movement towards a decisive commitment to favor a mentality that recognizes the dignity of human life and is in respectful dialogue with civil authorities, to encourage the creation of conditions that allow for the elimination of the death penalty where it is still in effect. So basically reform the penal system so that it's no longer needed. And then the Pope approves. Whew. Tired. Read through all that. It's work. All right, let me look through the chat. See what all is going on over there. If you have chat questions, send them. Make sure to send them to Reason and Theology. Let's see what we got. Trying to look through. Topper says, no offense, but the simple claim by Francis that he is not contradicting anything is not a great proof of it. When did I say that was a great proof of it? I never said a simple claim by Pope Francis is a great proof. I just walked you through 2 documents line by line and explained in much more detail than that simple claim. Did I say that elsewhere? I don't believe I did. So I think you're misrepresenting me. And I kind of wondered, where have you been the last 45 minutes? Did you not watch the last 45 minutes? Honestly, I'm trying to figure that one out. Maybe you just jumped in, though. Maybe you didn't see the whole thing. Let's see what else we got in the chat here. Trying to see if there are any comments directed to me. Oh yeah, be sure to check out the Telegram group that we have for R&T. There it is, the address. You could skip my question from earlier. You answered it with your understanding of immoral as absolute versus inadmissible as wrong, but with permissible exceptions. Yeah. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that Pope Francis believes that this is that the death penalty is always immoral, that it's intrinsically evil. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that. Even if he personally believes that, he definitely has not taught that in his magisterium. In his magisterium, to my knowledge, he's just saying that it's immoral today because it's against human dignity and we shouldn't violate that human dignity unless that is the only means to protect society. But our penal system has other ways to protect society. Therefore, we shouldn't violate their human dignity. Therefore, it's immoral to use it. That's what he's saying. And, he might be right there. That might be true. If what he's saying is true about the penal system, then yeah, he's right. It is inadmissible. Because we do have to accept the development of doctrine on human dignity there. So he would be right in this disciplinary change. And in the claim that it's immoral in that context. But what if all of a sudden there's what if all of a sudden we're pushed back into a society where we don't have that way to protect our citizens? The current system that we have, and the only way that we can really guarantee the lives of our citizens is by use of the death penalty. Would it be immoral then? No, it would not. No, it would not. Based on what we saw from Pope Francis, it would not be immoral then. It would definitely be an extreme way to protect society, but it would not be intrinsically evil or immoral. But what I suspect he would say is, but you need to develop your penal system as quickly as possible so that we are not doing this, because it is a violation of their human dignity. You might have to violate their human dignity to protect your society, but you need to fix that as soon as possible. So, let's see. Is violation of human dignity intrinsically evil? No, not necessarily. No. Because if you have to violate their dignity and that's the only way to protect human society, it would be permissible to violate their human dignity there, right? So it wouldn't be intrinsically evil. You could violate their human dignity if that is the only way to protect society. But he wants to say, since it is a violation of the human dignity, that should be the last resort. But since we're in a context where we have other ways to handle this, we shouldn't use it at all. Therefore, it's inadmissible, and it would be immoral then to violate their human dignity in the context of a society that can address criminals in a different way. All this is situated in that context. As soon as you understand the context of what he's saying, it makes sense. And you could say, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think what you're saying is reasonable. If what he's saying about our penal system is true, I think we could say, yeah, you know what? I actually agree with what you're saying. I just also want to be careful to protect the idea that, and I want to be careful to state that we're not saying that the death penalty is always immoral and it's always admissible in all places and at all times. You know, I just want to be careful to not say that. And I think that's legitimate. I mean, look, the magisterium itself recognizes that the magisterium does not always express itself in the best way possible. I think that's what's going on here. I think that Pope Francis has clarified in what we've seen so far, has stated the position sufficiently clear to guard against the idea that the magisterium is contradicting itself or something like that. He's done a sufficient job, but just because you do a sufficient job, that's, you know, it's like you did adequately. Okay. You made a D on your paper, right? Okay. Well, you passed. Yeah. You made a D, but could you have done it a little bit better? Yeah. And could Pope Francis have expressed this a little bit better? I think he could have. I think he could have brought it out a little bit more clearly and said, I am not saying it is always intrinsically evil. Now, he does communicate that sufficiently, but I think it would be nice to explicitly say that. Come out and explicitly say that for those who aren't paying attention when they read your document, if they even read your document. For those who are very selective in their readings, have it nice, big and bold for them. I am not saying that just because it helps, you know, the people who don't give you the judgment of charity and who don't read the context and who don't, you know. So could it have been expressed better? Yes. Was it expressed sufficiently? Yeah, for those who are paying attention and reading and are really, you know, working through the issue with goodwill. Yeah. I think it could have been done better. Let's see. What else we got on here? The biggest objection I have is that there is no explanation of how our understanding of human dignity has deepened theologically, merely that in modern times we appreciate it more. I think they're referring more to Dignitatis Humanae and the work done there by the Second Vatican Council. That's what I suspect they're referring to. So maybe refer to Dignitatis Humanae. Okay. Let's see what else. I don't even know that we're saying that it is a violation of human dignity. We may simply be considering that there is a risk to human dignity in the act that is not necessary. Well, I think that they do say that it is it's a violation of human dignity. I think that we read that, but is that acceptable in the context of a society that has no other way to protect its citizens? The answer would be yes. What else? Jared said, God bless you, Michael. All the episodes the last few days have been awesome. I wanted to ask, what is the strict definitional difference between a dogma and a doctrine? Oh, you're my favorite person, Jared. I love that question. I know we've gone over it before, but I'm more than happy to answer that one. It touches on something I like talking about a lot. So I appreciate you asking that, and thank you for the blessings and for the compliment there. I appreciate that. All right, so dogma, strictly speaking, is what is in the deposit of faith. So it's something revealed by God, which is found in Scripture and or tradition. I take the position that everything that is in sacred tradition is at least materially in Scripture. So I would just say what's in sacred Scripture, and sacred tradition I would see as distinct from sacred Scripture, but as containing materially the same information. Now, one explains the other more clearly, most certainly, and is the interpretive lens to understand the other. But it doesn't add to it, in my understanding. Now, so a dogma is something revealed by God, right? The deity of the Holy Spirit, or the deity of Christ, those we would say is revealed by God in sacred Scripture. A doctrine, however, I know people use the term differently and loosely today, but very strictly speaking, doctrine, especially when we speak of Catholic doctrine, pertains to those teachings that are infallibly taught. They're definitive, as are dogmas. Dogmas are infallibly taught. And I'll also add to that definition real quick of a dogma. There's undefined dogmas. It's just something revealed by God in Scripture, but the church has not confirmed that it's revealed by God. That's an undefined dogma. And then there are defined dogmas, and those are dogmas that they're teachings that are revealed by God, but the church has also definitively taught that it's revealed by God. So it's definitively confirmed it in its magisterium. So those are dogmas. Those are infallible. Catholic doctrine is kind of the second tier beneath that. And it pertains to infallible teachings. So they are infallible. They're not non-definitive. They are infallible. They are definitive. I should say infallibly taught. And they differ, however, from dogmas insofar as they are not revealed by God. So these are infallible, or teachings that are infallibly taught, that are not revealed by God, but are so intimately related to something revealed by God that and logically or historically, that if you were to deny the doctrine, you would have to then deny what is revealed by God. So the example I like to use is the resurrection, we would say, is an undefined dogma, at the very least. I don't know if it was ever solemnly defined. I don't think it ever had to be. But maybe a better one would be that Jesus is the Messiah is an undefined dogma, but it's clearly revealed by God, right? Or even no, let's just stick with that one. Let's just stick with that Jesus is the Messiah. Prophesied to come in the Old Testament. Well, if someone were to come along and say, hey, you know what? I don't believe Jesus existed. I don't think he was a real person. Are you denying the dogma? Not directly, but indirectly, yes. And it's impossible to say that I affirm the dogma while denying his existence, because that's historically connected to the dogma, right? I mean, his existence is actually logically connected to the proposition that he's the Messiah that fulfilled the promises of the Old Testament. So you have to maintain the doctrine in order to actually maintain that which was revealed by God. So these secondary objects of infallibility, these second-class tier teachings, Catholic doctrine, are infallible, but not because they're revealed by God, but because they're intimately connected to something revealed by God and are necessary to maintain in order to preserve something that is revealed by God. And they have been confirmed by the magisterium. So these are, when we speak of Catholic doctrine, they're secondary objects that the magisterium has put forward. It's not just like some random guy in the street says, hey, I think this is Catholic doctrine. And private individuals don't get to determine that. This is something the magisterium has proposed. Wonderful question. What else? Let's see. How can an act of justice, as described in the Catechism of Trent, be seen as a violation of the dignity of the human person? In a context of a society where that is necessary to protect society, you could speak of it not being immoral. And yes, it is an act of justice. I don't know anybody denying that it's an act of justice. I don't think Pope Francis is denying it's an act of justice. The question is it the proper way to handle criminals in our context today? So it's not directly violating what Trent says. And frankly, the Catechism of Trent is not authoritative any more than the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So why pit one against the other? Why would we think that the Catechism of the Council of Trent is somehow more authoritative than the Catechism of the Catholic Church? They're promulgated by the same authority. The Council of Trent did not promulgate the Catechism of Trent. They called for the Catechism of Trent, but they did not promulgate the Catechism. The council ended a year before the Catechism, the Roman Catechism, came out, which means they never saw the Catechism and said, yep, we agree with this thing, promulgate it. They never did that. They never looked at it and said, I agree with all this. The fathers never said, oh yeah, let's vote on this thing. Never happened. They just simply said, we need a catechism. For priests, by the way, to train priests. So on what basis would you pit the Catechism of the Catholic Church against the Catechism of the Council of Trent when they're promulgated by the same level of magisterial authority, namely the Pope? I mean, it's a legitimate question, I think. So I think you need to think through some of the assumptions to the question. And there's some other ones there too. But we'll move forward. What else? Looking through the chat. I'm seeing repeats of the same question, so I'm skipping. Still looking through, y'all. Sorry. Have I read the Philokalia? Not all 4, actually 5 volumes, but I have 4, but there's a 5th that hasn't been released yet. But just little, bits and pieces here and there. Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things that you don't want to just sit down and read cover to cover, right? I mean, it's more a devotional set of books. You want to slowly digest that one. It's kind of like the Imitation of Christ. You don't want to just sit down and read that thing cover to cover. I mean, maybe you do, but for me, I would want to kind of devotionally use it. Yeah, so I've actually used this one before. Would an example of a secondary object be the real difference between appearance and substance? Yes. That's eligible to be one. I think it's assumed in the magisterial definitions at the Council of Trent. But do they ever propose specifically you must believe the distinction between substance and appearance? I don't think that they do. I think what they do is they propose teachings and then speak about the distinction between appearance and substance, which would mean that you would have to accept the distinction. But I don't think that they propose it like as a proposition in and of itself. But it's eligible to be one, to my knowledge, right? But I don't think it actually has yet. So it's eligible to be a secondary object, but I don't think it's been elevated to a secondary object yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. But even if it hasn't, I don't think that that means that it's just up for grabs. You're free to dismiss it, because I'm going to say, but wait, how then do you affirm transubstantiation if you deny that distinction? How then do you affirm it? You might say, well, I can affirm the substance of the proposition of transubstantiation. I just don't accept that kind of language. I use different language. Somebody might do that. And if they're accepting the same dogma, like as far as the proposition of the dogma, well, according to Vatican I's definition, they're still, in continuity. And here, I mean, Vatican I's definition of a dogma and the necessity to preserve the same meaning of a dogma. Much more can be said on that one. Maybe I'll do a show on it. What else? Looking through the chat. All right, so it just seems incomplete to only focus on the protection of the innocent and completely omitting the justice component. Also, I did not say Trent was more authoritative. I know you didn't, but I'm saying that it is a temptation in the phrasing of your question that it seems like there's a temptation there to think that one would be more authoritative. Otherwise, why ask how does this comport with Trent? Unless you think Trent was more authoritative here. Because if you think it's less authoritative, you wouldn't even ask the question. So that's what I'm trying to guard against, is just don't pit the two as if one is more authoritative than the other. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying guard against that tendency, because a lot of people do have it. So at the very least, I say it for other people's benefit. It seems incomplete to focus on the protection of the innocent and completely omitting the justice component. Yes. Although you might still argue that justice is still being imposed by other aspects to the penal system that they're undergoing. So justice is still being served. And you might also argue that ultimate justice is going to be served by God and not by man. So you might still guard and protect the concept of imputing justice that way. Could he have brought that out more and focused on that more? Yes, and I think that he should have. That's why, again, magisterial teachings, as Dona Veritatis says, might be expressed poorly. They might not be expressed in the best way possible. And I think this might be the case. What else? Well, that's all I'm saying here related to our show. So I think we'll end it there. Hope y'all found this helpful. We'll probably do some more work on this. Stephen Long has a great article arguing that protection of society and Evangelium Vitae should be read in a more broad sense than merely protecting lives. Okay. Maybe so. But what we do need to take away from this is, number one, the development of doctrine on the dignity of the human person. I think that there is an obligation to assent to that development. it doesn't contradict anything in the prior magisterium that's more authoritative. So I think that there's an obligation for us to assent to that. And as far as the obligation to assent to the inadmissibility, most of us aren't in a position to do anything about the death penalty. So it's, again, hard to speak about obedience there. But whether or not we agree with the prudential and disciplinary aspect here, we have to then grapple with whether what he's saying about the penal system is true, and then also whether the development on the dignity of the human person informs our discipline on the death penalty to the extent that we say it's inadmissible today. Those are the things that we have to grapple with. So I hope that's kind of our takeaway here. Needless to say, I mean, I would think it. I think it would go without saying, but maybe it doesn't. This is not a matter of heresy. He's not a heretic. He's not denying Scripture. He's not denying anything that has been definitively taught by the magisterium. In fact, he confirms the magisterium, as he explicitly says. For you to say, well, no, he doesn't, that's inadequate, you're going to have to prove that he goes against the magisterium over and against his word. And based on what we've saw, I don't see that. I don't see that as the case. So this is not a matter of heresy on the part of Pope Francis. This is a matter of a prudential decision based on a development of doctrine and a development to our penal system. And so we should speak about it in that regard, not in the context of dogma or something like that. And again, any kind of claim that Pope Francis is saying that the death penalty is intrinsically evil is incredibly irresponsible and is slanderous against the Holy Father and is spreading lies. And one should no longer communicate that if that's actually what they're saying. So, okay, well, again, I appreciate y'all watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and make sure to check me out, patreon.com/reason and theology, if you support what I'm doing here and want to support me full time. And you don't have to do it necessarily on Patreon. You could also hit the join button here on YouTube and become an RNT member on YouTube. Get access to the same extra perks, extra videos, channel membership, and all that good stuff. So be sure to check it out and consider supporting me there. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, that is going to do it, y'all. We'll see y'all later. Hey, RNT fans, I'm really excited to say that Father Daniel Dozier and I will be leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 2023, April 19th to the 29th, and it's going to be Byzantine style, so you're going to get a Byzantine tour of the Holy Land. If you're interested in this, be sure to check out reasonandtheology.com/Holy Land for more information. And by the way, I also recently learned that Israel is no longer requiring a person to be vaccinated in order to be admitted into the country. So more good news. Once again, check out reasonandtheology.com/Holy Land for more information. Hey RNT fans, if you're looking to buy a home or sell a home and would like a realtor who shares your beliefs, be sure to check out our sponsor, realestateforlife.org, and be sure to tell them Reason and Theology sent you. Hello, RNT fans. I am really excited to say that Reason and Theology is an affiliate of Verbum, a Catholic study Bible program. If you want more tools to access theological and historical and biblical aspects of your faith, be sure to check out reasonandtheology.com/Verbum, where you'll get a 10% discount on packages in addition to 5 extra books. Once again, reasonandtheology.com/Verbum for more information.